Hello, I'm Derek McLeod from Hertford Regional College. I'm one of the electrical assessors here, and I'm creating a series of short videos, presentations on how apprentices provide evidence for their Sitting Guilds 5357 qualification for the 6 units that they are required to provide workplace evidence for, and those units are 102, 106, 108, 109, 113 and 115. That's for the installation, electrical installation qualification. For those that need to provide evidence for the maintenance qualification, there's an additional unit, but at the moment that's not covered in the presentations that I'm going to be putting together. So that, as I say, this is one of 6 presentations. This presentation is about collecting evidence for Unit 102. Apply health, safety and environmental considerations. If you watch the other presentations, you'll see there's slight change to the title of the first slide here. The others are about job write-up evidence. This one says collecting evidence, and I'll tell you why. Unit 102 Sitting Guilds are quite explicit. It's done through direct observation on 2 occasions by your assessor, and for those at Hertford Regional, I'm one of the assessors. So it's your assessor who'll be collecting evidence through their visits to you in the workplace in Unit 102. Now, there are other forms of evidence that are acceptable, and when I come on to explain in the next slide, when we look at the criteria in a little bit more detail, you'll understand why. We can use other things like questions, like professional discussions, but primarily it's done through direct observation. So if you want to know where we're looking, where we can find this information, well, Sitting Guilds have it available on their website. So we've got the qualification handbook, but this, as we're looking at the workplace evidence, this is the 5357 Level 3 Electrotechnical Qualification Workplace Logbook. You can print it out if you don't already have a copy, and then you've basically got a hard copy workbook for you to work your way through to help you compile your evidence on your portfolio. For a lot of apprentices, this will be done on an electronic online portfolio software, and they might be familiar with OneFile and Smart Assessor. There are other portfolio providers in the marketplace, but so they don't use the Sitting Guilds workbook, but the criteria, even on the software, originates from the Sitting Guilds criteria. So let's look at the criteria in the next slide in a bit more detail. Okay, so we're looking at Unit 102, and as it says, some ideas. Really, this is about being prepared for your assessor to visit you on site. The list here is the criteria from 102 that's up on this slide. You'll also notice up on the top right hand corner here, minimum supplementary evidence required. Now that's lifted straight from the workplace logbook, and for 102 it's on page 7, and it says 3 from the following, and there's a list of 3, so basically everything in the list. Now there's going to have to be photographs taken to validate the observation. It's reasonable to assume that if your assessor's coming out, they're probably going to take some photographs, okay, or a video. They need to see the risk assessment and method statement from their observation visit. So that's something that you can have prepared for them. So if we go through the criteria, it's really about ensuring that you're prepared for the visit now. And we'll talk about why they accept a few other types of evidence over and above the direct observation. It should make sense to you once I've explained. But it starts off with identify the workplace procedures, or which ones are relevant to the working environment, and comply with the duties. So we hear that duties, legislation, we're talking about risk assessment, aren't we? We're talking about the Health and Safety at Work Act and the duty to carry out an assessment of the risk. So that's easily done when, if we look down in 1.2, you have available to your assessor the risk assessment and method statement. So the RAMS document, so that abbreviation RAMS, risk assessment method statement. So a nice quick win. Your employer should have that available, okay? And if you make it available to your assessor, that's tick, you've complied with those first two duties. And then throughout the observation, when we look down, 1.3, A to C, they want to ensure that you're working in accordance with the risk assessment and method statement. So if you're doing what you've been trained and shown how to do, you're not going to have any issues. There are a few criteria in this unit that talk about identifying unsafe situations, and they might be high risk situations, and how you remedy it and who you report it to. Okay, now you can imagine when I come out and do, or assessors come out and do site observations, okay, the actual working environment is pretty well sanitized. So now we're all going to nod our heads and say, well, that's how it is all the time because we're safe at work. But there's even people go the extra mile, so it's clean, it's tidy. The chances of me directly observing an unsafe situation is pretty minimal. So that's where I would ask you, if you came across a spillage, what would you do about it? And of course, I'd expect you to know what action to take to make it safe. If you come across a high risk hazard, who would you report it to? And if there's a health and safety manager, there might be. Otherwise, it's your supervisor. Okay, so there's opportunity for there for a discussion or for some questions to be asked, and that will happen during the visit. So if we look through the criteria, and I'm not going through each and every one, I'm just doing this quite holistically with you. Select and use the correct PPE. Again, if you're complying with the risk assessment, it's natural that you're going to be using the PPE. There's one thing I'll say, 3.3, comply with information, warning and mandatory instruction. So that might go over and above your risk assessment. So you might be wearing, a hard hat and high vis. You're working in an environment that's all second fix activities, nice and clean, all finished, no chance of anything dropping on your head. So, but what you're doing there is you're on a building site, you're actually on a large site, and there's mandatory instruction. Regardless of your risk assessment for your activity, you can't even walk on site unless you've got a high vis on or a hard hat. So that's how we're evidencing that. Of course, your assessor will be ticking most of this criteria if you're behaving the way that your employer would expect and the behaviours and standards expected of you as an apprentice, you'll be fine. Using access equipment correctly. If you're using a platform, working at height, aid, or simply a set of steps, then your assessor will expect to see you check them off properly. If it's a set of steps, they might have a scaff tag, so assessor will be looking at you're making sure that it's been signed off and it's in date. If you're with an employer who maybe doesn't have that system, scaff tag, then you need to ensure that before you use that, you're carrying out the necessary checks, the visual inspection, and make sure it's safe before you go to use it. There's a criterion there about using guards and barriers. So again, being prepared for your assessor's observation, be great if you're going to have that available. So what we need to do is take each and every opportunity during that visit to sign off as much as we can in Unit 102. So it's about being prepared for your assessor's visit. If we look at the last one about how we handle hazardous materials and how we dispose of them, and there's a list, but you need to ensure that we meet the procedures for one of those acts. It should be a nice quick win. So if you're on a site, they probably have got specific bins for different types of waste. If you're not on a site at a smaller work location, your assessor would expect to see you separate materials from stuff that's going to go to landfill, general waste, for example, from metals. If you've got hazardous materials like fluorescent tubes, nice easy win, knowing that they can be disposed of safely at your wholesalers. Most wholesalers will have specialist bins for those disposals. That's evidence that meets the criteria. So you can see that being prepared is really the most important thing about this unit. If you're not prepared and your assessor arrives, bearing in mind this is about safety, your assessment will stop and your assessor will tell you that you don't have the correct PPE, that it's not safe to carry on with the observation. They'll probably want to go and speak with your employer as well. So be prepared. Now, we've got small employers and large employers. So for larger employers, risk assessment method statements, they're very familiar. They'll tender for jobs. They will have those, that's their life. For a smaller employer, that process it can be a little bit less formal. And what I mean by that is that, they might be working on smaller jobs. They might only have one or two, remember less than 5. There's no requirement to produce written risk assessments. They need to do one, but there's not a requirement less than 5 to have it in a written format. Now that's great, but remember, you have to produce one for your portfolio. So as much as there may be a case for a smaller employer that they're not in the habit of producing the written documents, that doesn't help you as an apprentice. So if that's the case, then we need to actually, for an assessor's observation, produce one. We need it in a written format so it can be evidenced in your portfolio. The other thing I would say, and again I will give examples, there is no exception to the duties required under the Health and Safety at Work Act to carry out a risk assessment and to wear PPE if it's appropriate. So if you are in a domestic setting, in a dwelling, and I have heard it, so I'm not wearing my work boots because I'm in someone's, we're second fixing and we're in someone's nice, clean, brand new, tiled or carpeted, floored area, and they don't want me wearing my dirty work boots, my safety boots, so I've just got my trainers on. Okay, that is not acceptable. So I'm giving you a specific example there because you're not in someone's home, you're at a place of work. So there isn't an exemption. So just again, it's about being prepared so that you avoid the assessor going, sorry, you've got your trainers, you haven't got your safety boots, we'll stop the observation. So again, we'll finish. Be prepared for your observation. Unit 102. It's one of the first things that you learn in college and indeed at the workplace, how to be safe. So it's something that we can evidence nice and early on your apprenticeship journey. Okay, and get 102 evidenced alongside another activity. So any comments, please post, let me know. Any requests, again, post, and hopefully you watch the next few presentations, and any feedback on whether this has been helpful, again, post and let me know. And good luck on your apprenticeship journey.